A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, Shabbat, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors the apostles and elders of Word Millstone for teachings of truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick on Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, this was a topic that was in my mind, and it goes, when you work on yourself, you become a better leader. When you work on yourself, you become a better leader. And as I was doing some meditation in regards to some of my experiences, some of my moments of what would I call that? Suffering, I realized there was essentially a peaceable fruit that came out of all those situations where I become a more of a whole person through Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai. Right? As a matter of fact, let me start off with that, because we go through suffering and it's uncomfortable. In situations it is uncomfortable, but when you go through it and after you come out of it, you realize you become more, you gain more experience, right? And you learn to essentially cleave onto the Lord too. That's another aspect of it. But you're becoming, and you're working, and you develop certain attributes, certain traits that you may not have had before, right? So this is, let me get it in the KJV. So this is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11, and it says, "Now no chastening for the present seemeth joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless it yieldeth a peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." Right? So, there are situations that you will be in that are very uncomfortable, but it's going to yield, a good amount of peaceable fruit. It's going to yield good works after the fact, right? That's what you want. You don't want to become bitter, right? But the point really is that in through those different experiences, in working on yourself in the midst of alone time, and sometimes you go through your ups and downs, like Paul describes. You have moments where you're abased and when you're abound. You will you start to realize you become a better leader, and making sure and understanding that you're a bit more well-rounded than you used to be prior to going through those different experiences, right? You become essentially you become a lot more sharper in certain situations. Your discernment starts to increase. You start to see, speaking for myself, noticing that you start to become a lot more discerning, when certain people, have certain things that you might struggle with before, right? When you looked at an old version of you, right? When you looked at an old version of you and you compared it to, and when you see, other people, whether it might be in the world or whatever, you start to notice that a lot of those people, you start to notice that they're struggling with those things because you took the time to essentially take that beam out of your own eye, right, and actually cleanse yourself, right, and actually make yourself more of a wholesome individual, right? But what does that really start off by essentially doing? You start off by actually acknowledging that you're sick, right? So I wanted to read this real quick because when you that journey of working on yourself, whether it's it's trying to be more giving, whether it's trying to control anger, whether it, like, if the shoe fits, wear it, right? We all know what certain things through self-examination, the things that you have to work on, right? And I wanted to read this real quick in Luke chapter 5, and it says, this is verse 30, and it says, "But their scribes and Pharisees murmured against the disciples, saying, What do ye eat? I'm sorry, why do ye eat with publicans and sinners?" And Yahushua answering said unto them, "They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance," right? And the reason I'm reading this is to understand that the journey of working on yourself is understanding that you are sick, right? I myself included, because you have to know that there are some things that you can tidy up. There are some things you can, cut back on. There are some things that, okay, I can improve on this. I can, do a little bit more of that. There's always a bit of, when if you're in that spirit of constantly self-examining and looking at yourself, there are always some things you realize that, okay, man, and this was a really, really bad habit. This is something that I can trim, right? This is something I can cut back on, right? That's why we have a physician, right? But I'm reading this to show that, you have to is acknowledging the fact that first and foremost that we're sick, and understanding that we need guidance. We need a savior. We need counsel, right? That's first and foremost in terms of working on yourself, because if you understood, like, for example, if you thought that there was nothing for you to work on about yourself, you would never have that understanding of being able to realize, okay, there's nothing else for me to strive for here, right? If you thought that you were whole, like how was I saying, people who are whole don't need a physician. Like you go to the only reason people go to a doctor, or you go to a mechanic, or you go to somebody who's able to alleviate a certain problem, is the fact that there is something about you that is broken, and there's something about you that is you have a blemish, right? You have some kind of fault. You have some type of childhood trauma that you're healing from, right? When you go through those things and tackle those things, with your physician, I'm speaking through Yahweh Bashim Shai, of course, right? Coupled with that counsel, it helps to, when you work on tackle those things, you start to become a better leader, being able to advise and examine and explain some of the tactics and the things you've done, right? The scriptures say that not to be negligent when you're sick, but pray to. As a matter of fact, let me get that. I didn't have that written down. Let me see. Where was that? I think that's in Sirach. Okay, this is Sirach chapter 38, verse 9, and it says, "My son, in thy sickness be not negligent." Let's get that word negligent. Let's go to the etymology. Negligent. Okay, it says negligent, remiss, indifferent to duty, careless, heedless, careless, unconcerned. Don't be unconcerned about the things that you have to, work on, right? Is constantly making an effort to try and overcome a lot of those things, because a lot of us had certain bad habits, myself included, and this is not to, make myself sound like a hypocrite, bad habits, from the world and so on and so forth. The way we probably handled certain situations, the way you handle certain situations, probably wasn't the most ideal way in terms of, like, for example, like conflict resolution. Those things were probably ideal, but you weren't negligent for those things, right? You're striving to put off those old man habits and renew that new man habits, right? And renew that new man. You know, scriptures say that put on therefore the elect, right? So essentially, let me see if there's anything more here. It says, so not to be careless, not to be unconcerned about those things. Scriptures also say that not to be ignorant of a small matter or great, right? So, a lot of this, it also is important. That attribute of self-examination is very, very much important, for becoming a better leader, right? So, I wanted to read through some an account here. Hold on, let me see, 1 second. Let's go to I wanted to read through this account here, with one of our forefathers, because a lot of the situations sometimes, that we go through, it also helps to what's the word I'm looking for? It also helps it in when we tackle our own situations. Let me rephrase that. When we tackle a lot of our situations, our personal situations that we're dealing with through the self-examination, like I read earlier, like I spoke about earlier, it helps to give counsel and proper guidance into trying to also help others, right? So I wanted to read this in Genesis, going into our forefather Joseph, right? So I want to jump around a bit in his story, right? And kind of hit some key points, right? So this is Genesis chapter 39, I'll start at verse 1 and I'll read down, right? So it says, and Joseph was brought down into Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him into the hands of the Ishmaelites, which brought him down thither. And the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashim Shai was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in thy sight, and served him, and made him overseer over his house, right? So now he has the responsibility of somebody who's an overseer. So let's get a little bit of understanding of what an overseer is, right? So in the etymology here, an overseer is a supervisor, superintendent, one who looks over. So someone, it says here, hold on, one who superintends workmen. Okay, one who has charge. So a charge going into a duty, responsibility, also can be likened onto a burden, right? So it says under an owner or a manager of the work done on a plantation, right? So someone who is making sure and is taking care of the daily affairs of whether it be a house or a business or so on and so forth, right? So this is what, just to get an idea of what our forefather Joseph was doing, right? So this is verse 5, and it says, and it came to pass from that time that he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, the Lord had blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field, right? So remember, when you go through his story, he had he was sold, down with the he got sold into slavery, right? So he had moments where he was essentially chastised, right? And then when you go through further in the story, I'm not going to read it, just for the sake of time, right? He even went through a little bit more chastising, going into when the Pharaoh's wife she saw him, he was, looking decked out, he saw that glow, that Israelite glow that, when a man has wisdom, right? And she made some advances towards him, right? And Joseph knew in his mind, like, this is wickedness. I'm not gonna entertain this woman's advances, right? So what does he do? He pulls away, but he ends up being falsely accused, right? So going into that that chastising that I spoke about earlier, right? A lot of the times are moments where we go through different chastising. Eventually, it helps to kind of round us out, so to speak, and kind of make us more, that peaceable fruit starts to yield, right? Going through those different sufferings and those different situations, speaking for myself, from my experience, going through different experiences and conflict resolution, dealing with my father, it helped to be able to provide counsel and strongly advise people who actually needed that counsel, needed that understanding of the scriptures to be able to, properly, what's the word I'm looking for? Properly tackle their own situations because of the situations I personally had to deal with, right? And I'm kind of just using myself as an example, not to make myself, on a pedestal, but the point really is that through those different uncomfortable moments of working on myself, and through those, coupled with those moments of actually trying to, go through the different chastising, because those situations were very uncomfortable. At the same time, when you bring it together, it makes you a more rounded out leader, a better leader to be able to advise, especially if you don't have a woman, right? If you didn't have a woman, for example, you know, going through those different situations. Like, let's just say, for example, let's take Joseph out of the situation. We're speaking about Joseph here, but put you in Joseph, in this story, and imagine if it's you, and for example your car breaks down. That's an uncomfortable situation. It's in the middle of the highway. That's a very uncomfortable situation, right? But if you're in that situation, for example, and that happens and you're with your woman, but because you dealt with that situation before without her presence, you know how to tackle that situation a lot more smoothly, and you're more well adept and more well rounded of what to do in this situation, because the Lord put you in that situation to round you out and to be able to advise some people, or advise whoever comes into your contact, to be able to put that, take on that leadership role on counsel of what to do, right? Hopefully all this is kind of piecing together and making sense, right? So I want to jump across, to after he's when the Pharaoh has the dream. So I wanted to read this, very, very important, in what Joseph does here, right? So this is where you start to see a lot of Joseph's leadership really start to kind of come out, right? So this is Genesis chapter 41, verse 25, right? And it says, and Joseph said to the Pharaoh. So remember, the Pharaoh at this point, he has his dream, and he's like, yo, man, I don't even understand what does this mean, right? What the hell does this dream that I had mean, right? So, he remembers, oh, yeah, that Hebrew guy. Yeah. What's his name? Joseph? Yeah, get him, right? So this is what happens, just to kind of print a snapshot of, get you an understanding of what's actually being spoken of here, right? So this is verse 25, and it says, and Joseph said to the Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. The Most High has showed Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 good kine are 7 years, and 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine came up after the 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto the Pharaoh, which the Most High is about to do. He showeth unto Pharaoh, right? So Joseph is essentially breaking down, explaining the Pharaoh's dream, right? So this is where was I? Verse 29, and it says, Behold, there come 7 years of plenty throughout the land of Egypt. There shall arise after them 7 years of famine. So famine is essentially a lack of food and substance, right? And it says, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by the Most High, and the Most High will shortly bring it to pass. Right? So this is verse 33. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint officers over the land, and take up a fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. Then let them gather all the food from of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Let the food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, and the land perish not through famine. So essentially, let's keep some food put aside, and making sure that we have some food set aside in the years of the famine, right? We know this is coming, right? Let's make certain preparations in order to get through these times of famine, right? So this is verse 38, right? So this is Joseph speaking here, right? And it says, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of the Most High is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as the Most High showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art, right? So, another aspect of this is, wisdom making scriptures say that wisdom maketh a man's face to shine. So this is how Joseph was moving, in this what's it called, like this dialogue between him and the Pharaoh, right? Because he was decked out in the spirit, right? So that's very, very important, because you've gone through those particular situations. And remember, as I read earlier in the previous couple chapters, Joseph was an overseer. So look what happens. He has that experience. He went through that chastisement. He has his experience of being an overseer. So look what happens now. This is verse 40, and it says, Thou shalt be over my house according to thy word, that all my people should be ruled, and only in the throne will I be greater than thou. So it says, and then Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee all over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his ring from his right hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck, and made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee, and made him ruler over the land of Egypt. Right? You start to see the progression here of, okay, he was able to be an overseer, over the Pharaoh's house, right? So, and then the Lord, increased him, so he was overseeing the land of Egypt, right? So he gave him a proper action plan of what to do. Appoint these officers, put aside some food, making sure that we're well prepared for that time of famine, right? So not only he was decked out, right? He was decked out, I should say, in the spiritual sense first, and then that translated into the physical sense, right? So that's why scriptures talk about how wisdom really and truly is the principal thing, right? And therefore get wisdom, and with all that getting, get understanding, right? Going back to the prayer that King Solomon had after his father passed. He said, I am but a child, to roughly paraphrase. Give me the proper instructions of how to actually govern, these people, right? So it shows you the importance of wisdom. It shows you the importance of working on yourself. It shows you the importance of when you tackle certain things about yourself and you're able to give counsel, right? Just like how Joseph is giving counsel to the Pharaoh on, okay, this is, what you should do, because he had experience as an overseer. So for example, if you equate it to, your own walk, your own experiences, you might have had an addiction to something. Okay, so now that I'm not over that addiction, now you have the ability to be able to give proper counsel on what it's like to resolve this addiction, some of the tactics and the action plan of the things that you'll be able to do, right, to tackle this situation, especially when you have a woman, because a woman, you know, when you think about the society as a whole, this society doesn't what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't push a vibration of self-examination. It pushes a vibration of constant pride, and that's one of the things the Lord hates, right? You can't deal with somebody who has a lot of pride and somebody who thinks that they have all the answers, right? So that's why I was reading that precept earlier about Yahushua saying that they that are whole don't need a physician, right? So it's also acknowledging that you have some things about yourself you got to work on, right? And being able, and when you overcome these things, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashim Shai and his counsel, is being able to give proper guidance and counsel, to those that are, I don't want to say less fortunate, but those who might struggle, because scriptures talk about when thou art converted to strengthen thy brethren, right? So there might be something that you might have been struggling with, and now you realize and you look back at yourself a year, 2 years, man, I used to struggle doing that. Man, I could be able to, I can share my experiences and my counsel on what it's like to actually overcome that. What did I do? You know what I'm saying? Because that's still very beneficial, right? So that's pretty much the point. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but understanding when you work on yourself, you're able to, and these things, you might even have sometimes people that might come up to you for, they may not even know you that on personal level, but since you have that glow, since you have that shine, people, they might gravitate towards you, and they might ask you, what did I do, what did you do to, whatever it is, right? So all these things, like, the Lord is far out. That's pretty much the point I want to make, right? These things, we struggle, but although as the scriptures say that although the outward man perish, the inward is essentially renewed, right? So being renewed and becoming a new creature, right? So all right, I've said enough, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson made sense and it was edifying. I'd just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.